Thank you for tuning in to Macroview Television and welcome to a brand new edition of Taiwan Outlook. I'm your host, Rui Guo. In a globalized world, everyone travels. But after you travel and stay in a foreign country for some time, you start to miss the food, the language spoken in your home country. That is what we call cultural shock. But what are the factors that are responsible for cultural shock? We're going to find out on today's program because we are delighted to have Dr. Catherine Chen, who's currently an Adjunct Assistant Professor of the Department of English at Shih-Hsin University, to share with us her views and analyses on ways to cope with culture shock. Welcome to our program, Catherine.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to come here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on the program. First, Catherine, tell us a little bit about yourself, like where you went to school and how long you have stayed in the U.S.
Well, my intercultural journey started when I was 18. I went to Emerson College in Boston, Massachusetts, got my bachelor degree in TV production, and I went on to the road working on the music production as a production manager for a few years. And then I moved to Los Angeles and then San Francisco, pursuing my career as a TV news reporter for another few years. And then I finally decided that I want to go back to study because I want to recharge myself. So I got my master's degree in speech communication in San Francisco State University. And I taught public speaking over there for a few years. And then I decided that I want to come back. I moved back home 80 years ago, and got my PhD degree in intercultural communication in Shih-Hsin University, and now I'm teaching public speaking in the university in Taiwan.
Oh, that sounds terrific. Catherine, let me ask you, as I said, at the beginning of the program, a lot of people experience culture shock, but would you please tell us what is culture shock and how do you know when you have it?
I guess in the way, if you look at what culture shock is, we look at it as a triangle. On the bottom side, you have this so-called, perhaps, American dream. And then the other side of the triangle, you have this actual USA. But on the top of the triangle is the actual expectation. It's this expectation when you are at home that different from the time when you get to the host country. So what we see on television at home is Hollywood signs, Statue of Liberty. But when we really go to the USA, for example, it's different expectation. That is the time we started to experience this culture shock.
So it's basically the gap between aspirations and reality. Is that pretty much? But let me ask you, what would be some of the possible factors that are responsible for culture shock? For example, we talked just now about the gap between what you expected and then what you actually received when you got there. And then could it be also something like, you have relatives and friends or significant others back in the home country, then you miss them, then you have a culture shock. Or you miss some aspect of your home country. For example, the food, the language, the TV program, the media productions, whatever. Could all these combination of factors be responsible for the causation of culture shock?
Actually, everything that you say can be the factor. I would actually say one thing to begin with would be if you receive high scores in the foreign language exam, because many people assume if I score high in TOEFL, IELTS, GRE, what have you, you will be able to communicate well in the host country. Yet, lots of the time, that's not the way it is. Language score doesn't equal to competent communication. So that's one thing. Now, second thing, I would definitely say another culture shock, which I wouldn't call that shock, yet it's under the umbrella of the culture shock, which is homesick. And that comes in the food.
Food.
A lot of the time when we first go to the host country in the USA, for example, we enjoy their burgers, the grits, the chicken gravy, what have you. After a while, when your palate is telling you you want bubble tea, you want fried chicken nuggets, your dumpling, beef noodle, and that's pretty much the time your body is telling you you miss home.
Okay.
And that is something, unfortunately, social media cannot replace.
No.
So a lot of the time you'll see overseas students or people working there for a long time, the expat, on the weekends, they were queued up outside of Little Taipei, of the Taiwanese bakery, or Taiwanese restaurant, or over the holiday, you got a lot of expats gathered together, enjoying the Taiwanese food. I believe that's also the time for the people getting together to feel this home together.
And let's talk about your own personal experience, because you said that you left Taiwan at the age of 18. Now you stay in the U.S., studying and working all together for about 15, 16 years. How did you overcome the culture shock as a Taiwanese expat?
Interesting that I actually didn't have too many Taiwanese peers when I went over there, perhaps because of the school that I went to and also the work related profession that I was in. So at that time, all I knew was that I needed to work with the native speakers group. So I sort of went through not only the racial ceiling, but also the glass ceiling. So I suppose at that moment, I didn't feel it was shocked. Whatever that came to me, I didn't feel that was the shock. It was afterwards. So culture shock, I assume a lot of the time we don't really feel it. It's the afterwards. We sense that.
All right. But didn't you have the time when you miss food back in Taiwan? Didn't you have the time when you miss speaking Mandarin or Taiwanese with somebody in your class? I mean, didn't those things come up? Yeah.
There's one time I miss Taiwanese food so much. I went to the supermarket and I bought a can of this lychee fruit. And actually, because lychee fruit in the can, and my English wasn't even that good, so there was something that happened that was rather funny. Now, come to think of it, I was eating the lychee fruit in the can, and my flatmate came back asking me, Catherine, what are you eating? My English wasn't good. I didn't know lychee in English. You just translate it. It's lychee. I look at the brand. It's like pigeon. I pick it up and say, I'm eating pigeon. Do you want some? They go, whoa, you Taiwanese eat very, very strange thing. Pigeon in the can. So that was I would say that's the mistake I made. So, and that was also the thing that I started to feel like, well, you eat different things from me. I'm eating my kind of a food. And that's the time I would contact my family, telling them about it.
This is what happened. Let me ask you, if you were to judge yourself, did you think that you were culturally adaptable? I mean, intercultural, adaptation. A lot of people will correlate that with your intercultural communication competence. Did you think that you are one of those people who adapted well and also was able to develop the ability to communicate with others in a different language effectively?
I believe it takes time. Now, the study that I did in the intercultural communication is definitely two things that we specify the differences between the culture in Taiwan and the culture in the USA. The one in Taiwan, we call that collectivism. Now, Taiwan is on the top list of collectivism, which is also heavily Confucianism influenced. Now, USA is #1 individualistic cultural society in the world. Now, the differences between these two cultures, if you look at it, is like Taiwan, the collectivistic culture, we stress on group identity, group harmony, unity, modesty, while USA is more stressing on individual success, creativity.
Yes.
So when I got over there, I was impressed with their individuality, perhaps, and the training that I also did. So what happened was that I went over more towards the individualistic culture, particularly with the works that I was involved in.
Okay.
So that was the thing that you would notice. I was definitely more adapted to the U.S. culture, I would say.
Okay.
So I personally believe that my culture shock when I first went over there wasn't too much that I experienced.
All right.
I would probably say that I was more individual way.
All right. We have about 60 seconds. Catherine, what were parts of the American culture that you felt instantly that it's not me?
Heroism.
Okay.
I'm the hero. Everyone can be a hero.
Okay.
That was
so
that.
You probably didn't enjoy people like Muhammad Ali.
I look at them. I know I couldn't be him.
Okay, but I mean, without accepting, that part of the American culture, which is fundamental in many things that people do there, wouldn't that be difficult for you to make the adjustments?
Yes, I would say so.
All right.
Back then, because I was fearless.
Catherine, you gave us a very comprehensive analysis about what people experience when they travel to a foreign country and stay there for a while, and voila, they have culture shock. Let me ask you this notion that you brought forth about the mythical, quote unquote, understanding of the U.S. For a lot of people, you mentioned briefly in the first part of the program, is that a lot of people have high expectations or how the USA should be, before they got there. But once they got there, something different happens, and then contributed, to their formation of culture shock. You want to elaborate on that?
Well, in the way we understand a host culture, first, of course, with a language skill. So just because one has high language skill in the foreign exam, particularly like TOEFL, that doesn't mean you really understand the culture per se.
Right.
So some people look at a culture have 3 layers on an iceberg. So lots of the time the Taiwanese overseas students first go over there. What they see is, or what they perceive at home is this superficial culture.
Of course.
What we see on television, Hollywood, NBA, NFL, you name it. But once we get over there, we realize their everyday life is not like that.
No.
And even if I score really, really high on TOEFL, I will find out the way they communicate is not how the exam is like.
Of course.
So what happened is many expats, they may marginalize within themselves because it's more comfortable to stay at the comfort zone, speaking your familiar language, eating your own kind of food. We call that marginalization.
Okay.
There can be also the time that one realizes, forget it. I'm not going to even bother with my old culture because I want to be so Americanized. Then they go to assimilation, meaning that they abandon their home culture identity. Now, there are also some group of the people that effectively, they were able to combine these two cultures. After experiencing the culture shock, figure out their own identity and forming this integrated cultural identity, which I have seen all 3 different kinds around from my life there.
All right. And some people will say that, Catherine, food when you start missing the food back home, and food is one of the biggest causes, if not the biggest, in terms of, forming homesickness. Do you agree with such an assertion?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Actually, the research has been showing that the high number of the expats getting together, eating their home food. Okay. And for me, actually, I think I actually had a little bit of that.
Okay.
But definitely, that's where you see a lot of cities, particularly with high percentage of the Chinese population. In Bay Area, in Southern California, in New York, you get a lot of little Taipeis. And trust me, their business are doing fairly well.
Yes.
Even though the tastes are not the same.
No. Okay. Yeah. And let me ask you this. Even though you say that people's scores high, on their foreign language exams, do not necessarily translate that ability into their intercultural communication competence. But how about, people's ability to adapt to a different culture, the intercultural adaptation, and subsequently their decision of whether they want to stay in the host country and assimilate further and, pick up, a family and form a family and, develop their careers there versus, on the other hand, their decision saying that, hey, this is not my, place. This is not where I, have a sense of belonging. I want to go back to where I came from or where my parents came from. Is that one of the biggest factors also in terms for people who are confronted with such a decision?
Thank you for using belonging.
Okay.
I think human beings always want to sense this belongingness. Who do I belong to? Where do I belong to? And then we constantly ask ourselves this question, who am I? Yes. Why am I here? What am I doing here? So many Taiwanese go into the United States, for example, they finish their degree. Now, some of them, they are very sure they are only there to get a degree, maybe with some working experience, they're coming back for sure.
Yes.
Now, if that goal is set, that's not what we are particularly talking about, I assume.
No.
It's more like we didn't really have the clear sign before we left. And then we got over there, finished the degree, got some working experience, and to certain points at this so-called intersection, usually about 5 to 7 years, I assume, from my study. This is time you ask yourself, am I staying or am I going?
Yes.
Do I stay or do I go? Now, what I have found, if the overseas student or the expats, if they don't have the personal baggage, I wouldn't say baggage, if they don't have a family there already, or if they don't find particular professional advancement, they would most likely coming back to Taiwan, especially if they have the elders in Taiwan. I found many people actually would move back because of the family reason. Me, for example, and my other study participants.
And given the fact that a lot of people still maintain their strong ties with their home country or their parents' home country, do you think that this is going to be more and more of a factor for people maybe use as a, excuse, if I want to use, that term, to say that, hey, I've done my studying, I've finished my degree, I'm going home. So they don't really have that intention during the 5 or 7 years they're in the U.S., for example, to try to assimilate, try to adapt to a foreign culture. Is that, becoming more commonplace?
Absolutely. We do know the U.S. Educational system is still somewhat more advanced than Taiwan. So many people, they actually gone to United States. Their goal is, I'm just going to get a degree.
Yes.
So it doesn't really matter if I can communicate with a native speaker well. It doesn't really matter if I haven't been able to understand their cultural value, their belief system. It doesn't matter. I just finished my degree and then I'm going back to Taiwan. So those are the one. Yes, maybe coming back with a better degree. I am afraid I wouldn't say they understand or care to adapt about American culture.
And Catherine, let me ask you, one of these people, Taiwanese expats, coming back to Taiwan after studying in the U.S. or other places for 5, 6, or 7, 8 years, and then they're coming back, what are some of the potential re-entry shocks they're going to have that they better be prepared for?
Oh, absolutely. So first we talk about culture shock, and now we're talking about re-entry culture shock. So we're having shock all the time. The thing is, after those expats coming back to Taiwan, what happened is that they were used to what's going on in the U.S. with big size of a land, driving everywhere, personal space. And one of the component in the individualistic culture is no personal question asked. So what I have found is that those expats, even though they were not there for good, but just a few years, when they come back over here, they realize, one, I don't really have my personal space. Two, why am I asked so many personal questions?
People want to ask you
how much money you make,
how's your family, how many kids you have, and things. Yes.
But actually, what happened? I would say actually with that, people have the good intention.
Of course.
It's two different cultures.
Exactly.
But it's one of this re-entry shock, the expat first experience, the personal space, privacy.
All right. Let me ask you, Catherine, you are probably one of the few that does have a bicultural identity. Do you think that has worked to your advantage, or is it something maybe fairly much even out? What do you think?
I had to learn. I have to learn about my own bicultural identity. I actually had a really severe re-entry shock.
Really? In terms of what? What were the parts that you were not used to?
Well, after being in the United States nearly 2 decades, even though I did come back to visit, but it's different than coming back for good, is that I did experience that the privacy, personal, that individualism, that individual identity. I didn't have it. My professor even said to me, you would have re-entry shock. I was living in denial. I didn't think I would. But after this reverse culture shock or re-entry shock, a lot of us, and I would actually proudly say I'm using this bicultural identity for my identity in the role in a different context. So when I need to act with my collectivistic identity, I know how to work on it. But also there will be contexts when I needed to show my individualism, I was able to do that. And I think I'm not alone. Many Taiwanese expats, you and many of us that has shone in the different professions. They are doing that as well.
Good. Catherine, well, we're talking about all these cultural shocks, re-entry shocks and things. But let me ask you, you are the one who has spent a significant number of years in the U.S. after, living, in Taiwan for the first 18 years of your life. What are the differences, major differences, in your personal opinion, about the culture in the U.S. and the culture in Taiwan? Please.
I would say the communication style.
Really?
Taiwanese, again, under the influence of Confucianism, perhaps the strongest Confucianism in the heritage culture society in Chinese-speaking community in Asia. So what we stress on is the indirect communication, modesty.
Yes.
We focus on context. And there's a hierarchy of the social status.
Of course.
So we call you Professor Wu. We call people by the last name. And it's no direct confrontation because it's not been pressed. Now, in the U.S., it's more about voice your own opinion.
Yes.
Forming your own voice and challenge the authority. Their communication style is more horizontal compared to the Taiwanese kind, which is vertical when you have layers of hierarchies over there. So I would say that's one of the biggest difference on the communication style. One is more vertical, one is more horizontal.
Okay, but now we're living the internet age. Do you think the advancement of technology have, somewhat helped in terms of bridging that gap?
Absolutely.
Between the different cultures?
Absolutely. And sometimes I am a bit jealous of the
what's
younger
available
people
now. Yes. Yes, but those are the things that we didn't have when we were much younger than we are today. But certainly I think the internet has changed the landscape, but also the mindset of a lot of people, especially the younger generation. They can buy things in the U.S. even though they live in Taiwan. They can browse to websites of different countries, and then they can learn new information. You look at what happened a few years back about Arab Spring. That's a very typical case about the socioeconomic changes through the use of internet or smartphones. But anyway, what is your opinion or observation about that?
Technology helped.
Yes.
Absolutely. It definitely make this intercultural communication much easier, more effective. But is it more appropriate? I guess you need to look at the base of the culture again. What's the deep value underneath of that iceberg part? And with the advancement of the technology, you definitely make Taiwanese understand American culture easier and vice versa. However, I do say that the deep value of this collectivistic culture and the individualism culture need to be bear in mind for better understanding of each other.
Yes, okay. And let me ask you this, Catherine. We have heard a lot of people saying about American-born Taiwanese, ABTs. What is the prototypical profile of an ABT? Would you elaborate, please?
Sometimes I actually give them a nickname, FBI.
All right, stands for?
Foreign-born immigrants.
Okay, all right. All right, good, all right.
Interesting. This ABC, I would say, many of them, their parents definitely coming from Taiwan with very strong belief about education, the importance about education. So many ABT are having really strong ethic, particularly when it comes to study.
All right.
So that I would say that generally saying they are very good at studying hard, being very strong on family value, and been working hard to have a better future.
Okay.
That's what we can see from their upbringing.
Okay. And how about the education system in the U.S.? Of course, it's still very much different from the ones that we see in Taiwan. And do you think, maybe we talk about the two different groups together. First is Taiwanese expats. And on the other hand, is the ABTs, the American-born Taiwanese. Would you think that for maybe the expats, the education system in the U.S. does help them to form a new identity, try to help them to assimilate to the host country? Or do you think the education for the expats will help them to saying that, hey, this is not where I belong. This is not where I want to be in 20 years' time. I want to go back to Taiwan. And I don't think the same questions will apply to the ABTs because they are born in the USA. All right, but what do they, I mean, in terms of balancing the school education with family education, where their parents were stressed values, like you said, family, hardworking ethics, how do they then find the balance between what's being taught in school? A lot of times that's a lot more individualistic oriented than versus the values they learned at home. What do you think? It's a broad question, I know, but we have short time.
Well, we look at it from two aspects. Let's put the U.S. educational system as a whole, and we're looking at. So first, if we started with the Taiwanese aspect, or going over there as a foreign overseas student to begin with, many challenges that I believe they are facing is about this possibility of challenging the authority.
Yes.
Asking the question. Challenging your professor, why this work, why not working, and also interaction with your peers. Okay. That's the challenge a lot of Taiwanese expats will experience when they first go to the university in the United States.
Of course.
That they need to ask the question, they need to participate, they need to motivate, regardless their language ability.
Yes.
Vice versa, actually, I've noticed many American high education authority officers have been telling me Taiwanese students seems to be lack of motivation. But I think that's because the Taiwanese students were
more
afraid.
Reserved, introverted. Yes.
Introverted, be modest, afraid of asking questions or afraid of making a mistake. So that's the phenomenon I have observed. Now, with the ABT, like you say, because they were born or grew up there when they were very, very young, so they receive the education system directly as the individualistic culture right away. However, this may have some conflict with the school education versus the family education, because at the school they are encouraged to be creative, to be individualistic, while the family, some, I'm not saying all of them, but more so in the more traditional family education is you must score high, you must do very well in every subject.
Yes.
Now that's the time they experience this conflict because at one side, I am okay not to do A+ on every subject. Yet when I got home, I was told I need to do this. And on the top of that, after I got home from school, I might have to go to study Mandarin, violin, and some other things. So that's the challenge that the ABT may experience with the education over there.
Okay. And what will be some of the re-entry shocks, the ABTs will face if they decide one day to return to their parents' home country? The kinds of re-entry shocks will be very different from Taiwanese expats. Okay. And what do you think will be some of them?
Well, I would probably call that a culture shock because for them, they didn't live Taiwan. They would just come to Taiwan. Yeah. I'm not talking about visitor, but actually really wanted to feel
stay.
So I would say that they don't know what to do, really, because even though their parents may tell them, this is your home, you are a Taiwanese, they perceive themselves sometimes either as a Taiwanese American or they identify themselves as American to begin with.
Yes.
So when they come back to Taiwan, most likely their Mandarin or Taiwanese or Hakka's dialects, language skill are not as good as the native, the Taiwanese to begin with. So what happened to them is the Taiwanese assume they will be able to communicate or to think like a Taiwanese, but they aren't. So they are confronted with this, I look like a Taiwanese, but I don't really think or like communicate like the Taiwanese grown up.
Okay, all right. And finally, let me ask you, we have about 60 seconds left. What would be some of the things that you would recommend the ABTs to do when they do decide to come to Taiwan? It is going to be a culture shock, no doubt. But a lot of people will say, or accuse them wrongfully, saying that you guys are arrogant. You're not able to assimilate, accept Taiwanese culture. What would be your recommendation to them?
Be more respectful.
Okay, all right.
It's a long traditional culture.
Of course.
And we are advanced in our own way, in the different style.
Okay.
So be more acceptable.
Okay.
Understanding is two different culture. Respect is the key. Okay. I will probably say.
Let me ask you this. Among all the different cases and participants that you have interviewed, how can we overcome culture shock when we experience it? What would be some of the stories or experiences that your research targets might have shared with you? That, what would be some of the recommended things that they have, said to you that you can share with us that we can help ourselves when we do experience culture shock?
It will happen.
Yes.
If you are really interested in the host culture,
yes,
then it's actually going to happen. It's not a bad thing at all.
Okay, all right.
That's because you try to understand the different culture. One participant actually told me that was an interesting story. She scored really, really high on the TOEFL and GRE, but when she went to the library to get the book out, but her language understanding, she would tell the librarian, I'm checking in the book. But the librarian say, check out or check in.
Okay.
So this check in and check out, simple daily usage of the language was her hurdle, yes, on communicating with others. Okay. It's okay to have culture shock.
Yes.
Crave for your food,
yes,
the home food, that's
yes,
quite
exactly,
okay.
yes.
And it's much more easier to access those food, not to say it can train our culinary skill.
Okay. Next, I'm going to go to a concept that you first raised, this so-called, quote, effective intercultural communication, end quote. What do you mean by that? What would be some of the things that the people can say to themselves and say that, hey, I have the ability to communicate with others in a different culture? What would be some of the things that we can watch out for?
I would say when we look at effectiveness,
okay,
is if I have delivered my message, okay, to the other counterparty, right, or the other counterparty have they received my message effectively. Okay. So it's a two-way straight thing.
Right.
I will probably say, again, look at the way we communicate versus how English language per se.
All right.
Again, we will need to be, since we are going to the United States, we will need to be more direct.
All right.
Not afraid of confrontation. Confrontation may not necessarily be a bad thing. And the willingness to communicate. I would say, number one thing, willingness to communicate. That means
to communicate. Yes.
You have this desire for the other party to understand what you're talking about. Forget about grammar error, forget about the vocabulary, whatever that will show your desire to communicate with the other side. Okay. Then that way that show your American or English native speaking counterpart that you are interested in. Yes. You want to participate. I think that's the key for the effective intercultural communication competence.
Okay. And let me ask you, what can people do when they face, cultural diversity? If I'm a Taiwanese expat, travel to the U.S. Because of work, and I need to stay there for 3 years. And during the course of the 3 years, I may be exposed to different culture. Not just the USA, but maybe some from Europe, some from the Middle East, some from South America. What do we do? What can we do? While we maintain our Taiwanese identity, Taiwanese cultural and heritage, but also at the same time, be open-minded, be adaptive, to the different peoples that we meet, the different cultures that we come across. What would be some of the things that you would recommend?
Often I say, different color, same opinion.
Okay. All
Good
right.
people are in every color.
Okay, of course.
Bad people are in every color.
Mm-hmm.
When we come to like racial diversity, cultural diversity, one thing that I appreciate that you mentioned, how do we keep ourselves? Now, usually if we go to the United States, when we are older than early teen, for example, our cultural identity has been rather stable already, knowing that we are Taiwanese, going to United States to stay or for a short period of time, what have you. But once we're there, when we are facing all different kind of a cultural background, different cultural background or racial background, one of the things that we need to tell ourselves, we're just like them. USA is a melting pot.
Yeah.
The beauty of that, of course, there's some racial tension going on. And that does happen under globalization. And this is the time that we need to face the globalization. There will be all different kind of people out there.
All right. And also, Catherine, you have said something like this, that we should be proud of our Taiwanese heritage. And then what do you mean? I mean, this is something, of course, not just, stated by you, but by others as well. But for you, what did you really have in mind that when you said, such a statement, that we should be proud of our Taiwanese heritage?
I would say friendliness.
Okay.
So many people have been telling me that Taiwan is the most friendliness and the safest state in Asia to begin with. And I think coming from post-colonial aspect, in the way, even though Taiwan is so small, had been colonized by different countries back then, and with influence from different part of China after World War II, this state, the island, the country has learned to be accepted other culture. We are really, really friendly. Many foreigner comes to Taiwan have been telling me that, or if they met Taiwanese friends, they have been saying Taiwan is a very, very friendly country. And that is the soft power we should cherish and let people know we are friendly and we have our cultural identity that's slightly different from other Chinese-speaking communities.
Of course.
This is what we have. We need to embrace that.
Yeah, and also make, all of us very proud. And Catherine, we know that you have stayed in the U.S. for about 15, 16 years, and you have now come back to Taiwan for about 10. But you do sometimes, occasionally, go back to the U.S., whether it's for personal reasons or for professional reasons. When you go back to the U.S. now, what is your perception of the place? Because after coming back to Taiwan, to your home country for 10 years, your perspectives might have been different. Now that you go back to the U.S., what is so different, about the U.S. today?
Well, perhaps when we were in it, we don't really see it.
Yeah, exactly.
And so back then, it was my home.
Yeah.
It did look like my second home. Well, for a while, I actually thought it was my home. And then coming back over here, and now when I go back to visit, I look at it more in the holistic way, integrated way.
Okay.
I look at this country, though with a young history, still with big potential.
Yes.
And after all, it's still considered a top list for Taiwanese going to the foreign country for study, working, and
just
other
travel.
reason,
Yes.
even that reason. And there's many things to experience. I would definitely encourage the Taiwanese going over there.
Okay.
Try out different things, interacting with people. It's a interesting country, and I would also encourage the ABT, checking out Friendly Taiwan.
Yeah, coming back to see their parents' home country. And the final questions I have for you is, Catherine, you teach at Shih-Hsin University, and so do I. You know, we have a lot of younger students in Taiwan. You know, today, because of the economic situation, not just in Taiwan, but regionally, also globally, isn't performing as well as we would liked. That people thought about picking up offers or seeking offers overseas in a different country, maybe that will offer a better pay, will give you better upward mobility in the future. But based on your experience, would you think that making a decision about jobs, about finding jobs, is really as simple as the dollar signs only, or do they have to consider other factors like family, culture, friends? We have about 35 seconds.
Well, I think the student in Taiwan, they really need to find out their own compatibility.
Okay.
Can they compete internationally?
Okay.
How do you prepare yourself to work internationally? What do you have?
Okay.
So I would say develop your own critical thinking to begin with.
All right. And
that's a good start.
All right. And then based on that critical thinking, then you can make the decision that you're not going to regret in the future.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for being a special guest on Taiwan Outlook today. We certainly want to wish you all the best in your future personal and professional endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I want to thank our audience for watching our program today. I'll see you next time on Macro View Television. Thank you.